Good afternoon or good morning to all of you. Thank you for joining us for what promises to be a thought-provoking webinar entitled Scaling Up After School at the Local and National Levels. My name is Joseph Mora, and I am the Senior Project Manager of Summer Learning for the Rhode Island Afterschool Plus Alliance, one of the 4 statewide after-school networks, the others being New York, Massachusetts, and Illinois, working in collaboration with the Wallace Foundation to offer you this webinar today. The statewide after-school networks are funded by the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation. For those of you not familiar with the Wallace Foundation, they provide a number of useful, high-quality reports and materials of interest to the out-of-school time, expanded learning, and summer learning fields. Inspired by Wallace's recent publication called Scaling Up, Staying True, we are excited to discuss scaling up your program, and our moderator and presenters will give you a city, statewide, and national view of scaling up efforts. We have a few polls ready for you, one of which is on the screen right now. The polls help us to get pertinent information to best tailor our remarks for you. So the slide that you'll be seeing right now is asking what your role would be, and there are a number of options. Before we launch into the program, I wanted to give a few housekeeping tips. Number 1, this webinar is being recorded. We will share the final recorded version with all attendees, as well as post it on the websites of all 4 after-school networks. Number 2, all attendees have been placed on a global mute so that background noise is mitigated to provide an optimal learning environment for all here today. We will also have time for questions at the end of the webinar. Please use the chat box, which is located on the right-hand side of your screen, to type in comments or questions for the presenters. Please use the All Panelists option in the drop-down list in the chat box. Your questions will be added to a list to be answered at the end of the webinar. So let's walk through the agenda. We will start with Brenda McLaughlin, a consultant to the Wallace Foundation, and she will give us an overview of Scaling Up, Staying True, the report that was produced by the Wallace Foundation a little earlier this year. She will then send it off to Alex Molina, the Deputy Director of the Providence After School Alliance. He's a good colleague and a good friend of mine, and he's going to talk about scaling up at the local/city level. Then he will give it to Keith Connors, who is the manager of the STEM Pipeline Funds from the Massachusetts Department of Higher Education, and Keith will talk about scaling up at the state level. And then finally, he'll hand it off to April Porter, the Project Manager of Achievement Gap Initiatives from the YMCA of the USA, and April will talk about scaling up at the national level. After April is finished, we will have a question and answer period, and we hope that many questions will come in so that we can provide a lot of answers for you and some insight. So looking at our roles, it seems as though the preponderance of people on the webinar today are after-school program directors as well as after-school program executive directors, excuse me. I think this will be a lot of great information for everyone involved, regardless of your role, but we do take that into account as we are working with our remarks, and it's going to be a very exciting day. So let me introduce our moderator. Brenda McLaughlin is the founder and president of the Learning Agenda, and she's a wonderful person and professional who has been involved in moving forward the work of summer learning and out-of-school time work on a national level. She's a skilled facilitator, evaluator, and technical assistance provider, adept in a number of different areas. She has also authored many publications relevant to our field. Her hope or goal with the Learning Agenda is ultimately to contribute to improved educational pathways for youth. Brenda is going to provide an excellent context for the idea of scaling up. We are really, really delighted to have her be a part of this webinar today. And before I send it off to Brenda, you'll note that there's a second poll question asking of where you are in the process of scaling up. So as we get those results, Brenda will interpret them for you and take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Joseph. Looking for those polling results. If you could go ahead and respond to that question now, that would be great. We want to get a sense of where you are in the process of scaling so that as we tailor our comments today, we know if you're in the middle of this effort, if you're just thinking about it, if you're a partner or collaborator. And so those results should be tabulated now. Okay, great. And so looking across folks who are on this call, it looks like Most of you either are in the early stages of just thinking about scaling up, and then there are some of you who are already involved in some efforts. So hopefully this will be a very thought-provoking call that will get your wheels turning as you continue in this important work. So I wanted to provide some context to this conversation by sharing more about a report that was produced by the Wallace Foundation earlier this year called Scaling Up and Staying True. I will also moderate the call for the other three presenters. And so the Scaling Up, Staying True report, what came out of the work of a professional learning community that I facilitate on behalf of the Wallace Foundation. And this learning community is comprised primarily of large national nonprofit providers of summer, after-school, and expanded learning programs. Throughout 2013, this group of providers really focused on the topic of scaling with quality and fidelity, and we explored the challenges of scaling from many angles. But at first, we began by asking ourselves, why scale in the first place? And it really boils down to two things. One is there's great demand for summer and after-school programs, as all of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with your roles. In the new After-School Alliance report, America After 3, it's still the case that for every child in an after-school program, 2 are waiting to get in. And in the introduction to the Scaling Up, Staying True report, we also highlight the gap in access to after-school lessons, showing that in families with an annual income of $72,000 or more, 40% of kids are participating in some type of after-school lesson, compared with only 18% of children from families making less than $18,000 a year. And so there is a great income disparity in opportunities for kids. So the need and the demand are there. Why else did we focus on scale with this group of providers? And the second reason is that it's really hard and complex work. There are many theories about and approaches to growing with quality and fidelity. Most of the organizational approaches to scale that we've reviewed as a group suggest that we need to do three things. We need to really pay attention to the community context within which we're trying to grow. We need to boil down our approaches to those elements that are core to our model and at the same time necessary to achieve our intended results. And third, we need to align our organizational approaches to scale with systemic and policy efforts that also support our work. And so, importantly, there are also approaches that emphasize how to scale via system building and collective action rather than one organization going at it alone. And so in this report, Scaling Up, Staying True, which you'll see the cover of on this next slide, we have the opportunity to dig into approaches to scale with two leaders in the field. One leader is Larry Cooley, who is the president of Management Systems International, and the second leader in the field is Jeff Braddock, who is the co-founder and partner of the Bridgespan Group. And each of those presenters offered really valuable lessons learned based on their approaches to scale. And if you go into the report, which I encourage all of you to do so, you'll see both of their theories and approaches to scale summarized at the beginning of the report. In Larry Cooley's approach, he offers a 3-step, 10-task approach to effective scaling, which breaks down scale into steps that focus on what it is that you're scaling, how you approach scale, and who is taking the model to scale. And Jeffrey Braddock's approach, which is Pathways to Transformative Scale, offers thinking about how to expand upon what individual organizations do well, but also how to push the field toward a shared target or reaching scale by building the field. And so I know many of you on this call are part of an after-school program and will be thinking about how to approach scale from an organizational perspective, but there are also others of you who are thinking about this from a field building or a system building perspective. So as we segue into our presenters, I'll leave my comments with just a couple key takeaways that we got from our time together with Larry Cooley and Jeff Braddock, and these are also elaborated upon in the report. And the first big takeaway is that we have really, in our field, had potentially an overly developed focus on innovation. And so we have big problems, yet small money, and so we've had a proliferation of pilot projects, but yet we don't have a way to turn those pilot projects into large-scale solutions that affect large-scale change. And so we started the conversation about how do we do that? How do we flip what's going on so that our pilot ideas become big solutions rather than little solutions? A second key takeaway that we had from this meeting is that simplicity is really key for large-scale adoption. And we had some discussion about, what the it is when you're trying to replicate an intervention. And the advice that we got from Larry was be relentless in trying to take away the pieces that are not fundamental. One of our partners on the call from Bell said find the zone of fidelity. Another person compared this to Jenga. See how many pieces you can pull out and still leave the structure standing. And so we had a lot of discussion here around simplicity, but yet we also know that kids have a variety of needs that often need to be met with solutions that are not so simple. And we compared the experiences of lower income children who typically have less opportunities in the after school hours to those of families that might be putting together a very complex, rich blend of opportunities for kids. And so while simplicity is key, let's not lose the fact that we also need to individualize our opportunities based on the needs of our kids. A third takeaway, which I'm sure won't surprise any of you, is that deep engagement with the community is critical. Institutional decision makers might be reluctant to accept new ideas if they feel that they didn't have a part in developing them, and so bringing your stakeholders in as part of the development process will really be important. It also helps when you have a large community commitment to your scaling initiative that you can withstand changes in leadership. When local leader, such as a mayor or superintendent, turns over, you still might have commitment to your effort to scale. And then lastly, the point I'll leave you with, and this was something that was emphasized by Jeffrey Braddock, is we often spend a lot of time on tweaking what it is that we want to scale. And we talked about, the it and the simplicity being important. And maybe we don't spend enough time on drumming up the demand. And so this is said to remind us that that is equally as important as finding the correct solution. And so with that, I will show you where you can find some of these goodies on the Wallace website, which is in their Knowledge Center, and I encourage you to go there and to visit the Knowledge Center. And I will turn the presentation now over to the capable hands of Alex Molina, who is the Deputy Director of the Providence Afterschool Alliance, and he's going to talk about scale from a citywide perspective. Alex?
Thank you, Brenda, and thank you, Joseph, for such a kind introduction earlier on. So my name is Alex Molina. I'm the Deputy Director for PASA. And let me tell you a little bit about PASA. PASA was founded in 2004 to ensure that young people in the city of Providence had access to high-quality after-school expanded learning opportunities. At the center of our model are basically our after zone and high school. After zone is just middle school, and hub is for high school students. Both models basically leverage over 100 community partners, schools, city agencies, and higher ed to provide young people with hands-on experiences. Over 2,000 young people participate every year. Of course, before we were successful, PASA was really, really careful to map out and implement a plan that would not only allow our model to grow and expand, but ensure that we did not dilute our brand and our programs had a community approach and voice. So before I go in, let me tell you a little bit about Providence, and I'm pretty sure a lot of local communities can relate to this issue. Providence is a struggling city. It's a city with a lot of poverty. It's a city with anemic philanthropic base and struggling schools. So we knew that some of the challenges we're facing in order to create this model. But from the beginning, we knew we need to create something that had community ownership that will avoid people competing for resources. So we knew our job was to leverage additional resources, provide the infrastructure for individuals to do what they do, work with kids. In addition, we realized that one of the key things that PASA needed to do in order to have community ownership was to look at the opportunities. Yes, there's some drawbacks in Providence. However, we have a great sense of opportunities and a great community organizations. So our job was to ensure that the school district, our arts organizations, our higher ed organizations, even the mayor, everybody was on the same page. So our job is to have the infrastructure to look at those challenges and face this idea of creating high-quality experience for young people head-on. So once we established exactly our roles and responsibilities, we looked at a business plan. We looked to see what was the biggest gap. We did not make the assumption that we had all the answers, and that's something really important when working with a local community. We looked to see what were the gaps and see what people were delivering there. Once we knew what was out there, once again, our job was to look at those opportunities to ensure that the community had the resources and tools they needed to provide high-quality experience for young people. And that was our approach. Look at the gap, look at the resources, how do we leverage the resources, and how do we ensure that everything's delivered high quality? In turn, allowing adults to speak the same language for youth. So we had a baseline and a finish line. From there, we looked at the day-to-day operations. We had an ultimate goal in mind. We knew where we were going. We knew we had the resources. And then as we continue to grow and expand our services, we kept the community involved. We kept the city involved, and we kept engaging young people. And most important, we're accountable to youth and our partners. So at the beginning, we really set some set of outcomes that were attainable. We did not want anybody to fail. We wanted to make sure that people were working together, and we were there to pick up anybody up who failed. So our job was not to be the after-school police. Our job was not to tell anybody who was good or bad. It was to ensure that everybody in our community had the tools and resources to scale up. And even more, another thing that we learned right away was to ensure that day-to-day practices were streamlined. We have an operations manual. We do training for our frontline staff and our partners. That empowered and gave our frontline staff and our partners, teachers, CBOs, anybody in between, the ability to operate our system without having PASA behind their back. That gives ownership, that allows them to do their job. So having policies and practices that are replicated throughout a whole city allows us to not only pilot something in one school, but eventually if the pilot works, scale it up to different sites. So that was core. Once we had established this, once we had protocols and procedures, once we had trained everybody and we knew we had a good quality product, next thing you know, demand started to follow. Parents and teachers and other school administrators wanted the after zone in their schools. That allowed us to pick up this model, replicate it in a different place, and eventually increase our impact in the number of young people we were serving. So that was logistical phase one. We had an interface with school. We had an operation manuals that worked. We had people interfacing, understanding what logistics looked like. We had training. So we had all adults working together. That allowed us to dive deeper, to look at existing resources, move them around to enhance the product. Once again, we're not doing things out of the blue. We're consulting with our partners. We're training them how to do it. We're all working together to leverage resources towards the same goal that we had in mind, the same goal that we planned from the beginning. So once we had that done, we had logistics done, we had it expanded, we looked to dive deeper. And this is the second way we scaled up. Not only we scaled up in the number of youth served, but also exactly how we were serving young people. By building something that had ownership, by building something that people trusted, it allowed us to dive deeper. It allowed us to actually have more interface with our school district. So for example, we started with a middle school model, eventually grew to create a high school system that looked at existing resources and it looked how to leverage additional planning, additional funding to ensure that young people receive credit for out-of-school time. Eventually started one high school, and we're growing and growing to serve 4 or 5 high schools this year. Once again, key to this is having the community part of the process, ensuring that day-to-day practices, protocols, and procedures are documented, codified, and once again, allowing the frontline staff to understand and take ownership, even more, celebrating victories. And lastly, I'd like to close for those who are thinking of scaling up, especially in a city level. There's no magic bullet, but I do believe there's some common practices you can think about. And one of them is plan. Bring people together to decide exactly what you want to do. And as you plan and you're bringing people together, keep in mind that you need to have the right staff at the table. You need to have staff that knows how sometimes they just have to listen. You need to have staff that knows how to facilitate meetings. Those are some of the simple things that are going to allow you to have parties that sometimes may not agree with each other. But having the right staff at the beginning to convene and plan is critical. In addition, your role should be, well, like I said earlier, not the police telling people what they did wrong or what they should do. Your role is to ensure they have the resources, either money or other resources, to do their job. So it's not a punitive approach to scaling up. It's how do you work together with your partners to deliver something. And additionally, you got to course correct as needed. You got to advocate and by policy, and you got to celebrate your victories. And once you have all of this, you may have a good tool to scale up either your impact and also the number of youth served. So remember, have a plan, have a finish line, and involve your community, and you should be successful. And that's in my presentation. Brenda?
Great, thank you, Alex. I appreciate your perspective, and you really emphasized and hit home how important it is to engage with local stakeholders and keep folks engaged right off the start. So now we will transition to Keith Connors, who's the manager of the STEM Pipeline Fund for the Massachusetts Department of Higher Education, and Keith is going to provide us with a state perspective on scaling. Keith?
Thank you so much, Brenda. I appreciate it, and good afternoon to everybody. My name is Keith Connors. I'm the program manager of something called the STEM Pipeline Fund here in Massachusetts. And this is an annual allotment of funding that comes from our state legislature to the Department of Higher Education as the administrator, but really to provide funding for programs that increase student interest, retention, achievement, et cetera, in STEM education from birth to workforce, really. But Massachusetts is particularly interested in this question of that scale. It's something that we've been looking at and really working on. In fact, going back to 2009 with the creation of our Governor's STEM Advisory Council, knowing that a lot of states had this council, we wanted to pull together a group of high-level individuals from academia, business, government, nonprofits, to really look at STEM education in Massachusetts, and particularly to look at what's been most effective in our state. That's really helped us to move the needle on the goals that we have. With that said, I should tell you that we have a state STEM plan. The first iteration of it was issued in 2010 at our annual STEM Summit, and we've updated it just this past year to focus more on local strategies. But it's been a great document, and it has 5 defined quantitative goals, measurable goals that we're continually trying to advance to find our way through educating all our students here in Massachusetts. Our challenge, like so many people, is really having sufficient numbers of our citizens skilled in STEM fields and able to meet the call of industry and government for the needs that we have in our innovative economy. I know that's the same in many states. And what's so wonderful about the After-School network is so much of the focus recently has been on STEM education, and we know that the earlier we engage and interest our students, the more successful we'll be that they'll pursue STEM and graduate with the skills that they'll need to be employable in our economies. You know, one of the interesting things in Massachusetts, and it might be the same for other states, is that we almost have too many STEM programs, a lot of them very good. So, you know, the success is that we have a lot of great STEM programs. The challenge is that, in fact, we have a lot of STEM programs and that they're not really aligned. They often exist in silos. So many of them are great innovative projects but aren't sustainable, so they don't stay, they don't persist in terms of the effectiveness that they have been able to show. So a famous line by our executive director is that, you know, we have 1,000 points of lights, but how do we take that light and shine it on everyone so that they effectively can achieve to their greatest extent? Our Lieutenant Governor, who used to run the Governor's STEM Advisory Council, it's now led by our Congressman Joseph Kennedy. I love to say that it's random acts of STEM that we have, but we do need to focus a little bit. So we were really looking at how can we really identify best practices with a proven record of success and that have the qualities to easily replicate or scale to align with our state STEM goals so that, in fact, we are advancing in those areas and doing better as a state. The solution that we came up with is to really define or create and define a model that we could use that would help us to identify projects that, in fact, have a proven record of success and have the ability to scale either from school to school, district to district, region to region, or statewide. the elements within that were that we really want to make sure that this model represented all students, diverse students, non-traditional entrance to the workforce, and that in fact it provided training and preparation for people to be not just STEM skilled but STEM literate and be able to participate fully in our society. So we came up with the at-scale model, and if I go to the next slide, we did create a process for what we had developed, and first it was defining STEM criteria. So within that, we were looking at projects that could identify and qualify through STEM data, STEM education challenges that were central to achieving the goals of the Massachusetts STEM plan, projects that were grounded in research designed for replication and scale-up, and that demonstrated success in achieving student outcomes related to those challenges. Projects that promoted partnerships with school districts that serve significant number of students within the achievement gaps that we've been able to identify through our own data research. Projects that have confirmed commitments of time and resources from partner school districts to ensure success and sustainability for transformative change. So often the school is so integral into the success of projects being able to proliferate either in school or out of school, and it's so important that you really know the partners that you're working with and that it's the right fit for them. And lastly, something unique for at least initiatives here at the Department of Higher Education, we put on a requirement that for every dollar that a project was able to, or that was requesting from the state, that they raised $3 in private funding, so that it was a 3-to-1 state to private funding match to kind of address the sustainability issues that so many of us face. And I'll tell you truthfully, it's still a challenge for us here in Massachusetts. This next slide that you're looking at, this grid, just gives you a graphic visualization of where we're at with this at-scale portfolio. So we've identified 17 projects, but it was done in phases aligned to one or two of the 5 STEM goals. So right now you're looking at a grid that we were really doing a consideration of the different learning levels and then going across the STEM disciplines. And as you look at that grid, you can see that there's still gaps that we need to fill in our early education and elementary school areas. And it's been very helpful to us to be able to kind of see this on a grid and know that the needs that we have and those needs that we need to address. Moving to the next slide. So this is, I want to point out, this is really a new initiative for Massachusetts, this at-scale project initiative. We're still finding our way through it, but in this early stage of it, some of the statistics you're seeing before you is that, as I mentioned, there are 17 projects. At this point, the projects have touched or reached 8,000 students, 220 teachers, 60 displaced workers, and 96 employers. There's been over $1 million in state funding through the STEM Pipeline Fund that I oversee, and that has brought in a match of private funding of $2.6 million. So not quite the 3-to-1, but fairly close to it. And that the projects, in fact, have covered the spectrum of science, technology, engineering, and math, and that projects do go, for the most part, across every learning level. Just trying to change that. There we go. Slide. So in every initiative, we know that evaluation is important. We've approached evaluation on a couple of different levels. And there's 2 things we're looking at, if you think about it. One is we're looking at the model itself. Is this the right model? Is this model attracting the type of projects that will meet the needs here in our state? And 2, are the projects themselves quality projects, projects that can scale, and projects that actually fit into the model? They might be actually very effective projects, but they might not actually fit in the model that we've developed. So there's the 2-level evaluation that we've been doing. We've looked at the projects through their own reporting, through yearly evaluation reports. through focus groups where we've convened both the program managers and administrators, but then on a different phase, program facilitators and recipients to really get a better understanding of the effectiveness of these programs within their organizations. And then we've done site observations as well, where we've gone in person and spent a day looking at these projects from different lenses to see if, in fact, what we understood the projects to be are showing that they are in their implementation. And lastly, some of our preliminary findings at this point is that we are seeing that the at-scale model does drive investment. It's interesting, those 17 projects that have been involved with at-scale are finding that because they get an endorsement by the Governor's STEM Advisory Council, and I don't think I've mentioned that, but that's part of it, that they're understood to be endorsed by our STEM Council as effective programs, which is a very effective tool for them when they're going out for grants, and we've heard that to be the case. But equally, we've heard that in some cases that hasn't been the stronger allure to this initiative, but for them it's actually been the funding from the state and then receiving matches by the private sector. So we're still kind of looking at that question to see how we can make this a stronger model and which is the stronger attraction. We also, at this point, it's still been a challenge, and when in the question and answer period, I'd love to hear, it's still been a challenge for Massachusetts to really see significant investment in these projects from the business sector. We do have a business engagement plan being developed by the Governor's STEM Advisory Council. The other co-chair besides Congressman Kennedy is president and CEO of a biopharmacy company who is really leading the charge in the business engagement plan, and on his level has more opportunity to bring to the table those players that should be there and whose voices we really want to hear and understand what's important to them so that we're creating the right kind of model that will fit their needs. And lastly, I just threw in some pictures of some of the 17 projects that we have that, as you can see, are for a number of diverse types of groups and different types of activities. And we're excited about this initiative overall, and we're continuing to learn. And as we learn more, we'll share with all of you. And we thank you for the opportunity to share today. Brenda?
The multiple. Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I thank you, Keith, for your comments, and also I really liked the way that you phrased the multiple points of light shining all in one direction, and love the chart where you laid over all of your efforts so that we could see the intersections. So I wanted to, before going on to April, our last presenter, just remind folks that if you do have questions for either Alex or Keith who have presented, you can feel free to enter them now, and we'll be tracking your questions and comments so that after April presents, we will enter into our question and answer period. And I did already receive a few, so please keep them coming. And now we'll hear from April Porter, who's the Project Manager for Achievement Gap Initiatives at the YMCA of the USA. April.
Thank you, and as everyone said, good morning and good afternoon to everyone. Let's take a look here from the YMCA of the USA, and what you'll often hear me refer to us as is YUSA, so just a quick note on that. What we as a large youth development organization recognize, along with our local YMCAs, is that with both, as was mentioned earlier, a demand and a need for a coordinated movement-wide approach to the achievement gap issue. So here you can see our response. In 2011, we began to identify programs strategically and intentionally aimed at the issue, which we named signature programs. Those programs are really identified after lots of vetting of different sort of program areas, and we landed on 4 different areas, which were early learning, after school, and summer learning loss prevention, with, again, 2 different models under that summer learning loss prevention search plan. The models for after school and summer learning were actually adapted from local YMCA evidence-based models. But we then set out to pilot those models while at the same time preparing for scale. Underlying the work are two primary beliefs, which you can see here: invest in the whole child, and also the school system is critical to our efforts. That's, again, really that deep dive into school partnerships and community partnerships as well. It's important to note that this effort is not just a passing fad for the YMCAs. In fact, YUSA is so deeply committed to this work that we addressed it in our 2014-2017 strategic plan. The content and language on this slide comes from that plan. So we're not only committed, but we're very accountable to this. As you can see in strategy number 2, expand signature programs and develop a pipeline of new program opportunities to innovate responses to this pressing social need. Here is a very big snapshot of those 4 signature programs that I mentioned. Again, early learning readiness, which really helps build on the assets of informal caregivers. It's a model that actually came out of Hawaii. The Summer Learning Loss Prevention Program and our Power Scholars Academy program are both programs that address the summer learning loss issue. Our Summer Learning Loss Prevention model is really a K-3, hoping to expand to K-5 model. And then our Power Scholars Academy model is a partnership with the BELL organization, Building Educated Leaders for Life. And then finally, our after-school program, which I will take a little bit closer look at in the next slide. So here you can see that the after-school program, the key words that I would point out here is it's really an academic intervention, which looks a little different from some of the after-school programs that the Y typically engages in across the country. Of course, you know, in all 4 of these, we're already seeing significant impact, and especially impacting the academic success of young people. So you can see also on this slide that in addition to academic intervention, it includes homework help, tutoring, STEM, global learning, leadership development, social and emotional development, and a host of other enrichment activities. Now, after going through those, I just wanted to give a quick overview of those 4 programs and then do a little bit of deeper dive into after school. But now I want to take a look at the Achievement Gap pilot from a national perspective. So here you can see how we've slowly not only been doing a pilot, but also slowly scaling as we've had lessons learned. So in 2012, we had 16 states with at least 1 pilot. And then you can see as we grew to 2014, where we have 39 states plus Washington, D.C., with at least 1 pilot. And again, looking at this map, the good news is most of these, not only do they have 1 pilot, but we've got Ys with multiple pilot initiatives happening in these states. And again, here's just a quick overview of our original plan and how we're not only on track for that, but we're actually ahead of it. In total, 93 Ys across the country are piloting our Achievement Gap signature programs, again, at 1 or multiple sites in their communities. You can see here the original goal was 350 by the end of 2015, and we're currently at 578, and that's probably growing by the minute. And then again, I wanted to take a quick look at projected enrollment by program, and we're continuing to grow, of course, through each program. But just looking here, you can see that by 2017-18, we have directly impacted at least 65,000 young people, which is quite exciting. Impact highlights. 90% of caregivers in our early learning readiness program have cited an increase in their child's ability to follow instructions, play with others, try new things. So again, that's really a school readiness program. And across this, you can see after school, I mentioned we were looking at social and emotional learning. You can see some of the impact there in regards to social and emotional skills. Summer learning loss prevention. In 2013, we had sort of that, if you're looking at grade equivalency, we had a 2.4 months gained amongst our first, second, and that included a small number of 3rd graders. And then with our Power Scholars Academy, again, that's the K-8 model, and they had, if you're, again, looking at grade equivalency, a 7.1 months gain in math skills. So again, some exciting impact results that we are happy to share with folks. lessons learned. We've got a lot of learning from our collective efforts. Among other things, we've learned how critical partnerships are, the importance of staff recruitment and retention. The leadership engagement, of course, is critical as well, and intentionality regarding community engagement, family engagement, and youth engagement. And then as we continue to scale, the identification of core fidelity and quality markers is something that we've spent a good deal of time on. So here you can see we've also started to look at our capacity building agenda. It really has two major components, a core supports assessment and the listening tour. So here you can see we really had a chance during that listening tour to get that local level feedback, which again, we wouldn't be able to pilot nor scale without listening to our local whys, which includes hearing from community partners, families, and making sure that and actually the youth as well, making sure that we really listen to those perspectives as we built a capacity building plan. This information that we got from both the core supports assessment and the listening tour helped us and really was critical in us developing our capacity building plan, focused on scaling signature programs, and really addressing that initial demand and need that we saw at both the local and national levels. So thank you. That's all. Again, we're excited to be a part of this today and look forward to questions and hearing sort of more feedback on what people think about the national perspective on scale.
Great. Thank you, April. So we have had a number of questions come in, and we have a couple that focus on fundraising and getting funders' interest. We have a few specific ones for presenters, and then we have some just asking for advice on kind of where to start. And so I'm gonna start. The question that we got was, is there an easy to follow guide or planning template when planning to scale up as an organization? And I shared in the beginning that there are a lot of different models and approaches to scale, two of which are highlighted in the Wallace report, Scaling Up and Staying True. But I wondered to each of our presenters, did you have a go-to resource or something that you were really reading through as you were planning to scale up? Would any of our three presenters want to take that?
I can talk about Providence, and I can tell you some of the things we did use. We had a business plan that truly outlined exactly what the organization was going to do 3, 4, 5 years down the line since we started. So the original plan was to scale up, knowing that the mission was to create this model for an entire city. So we did use our business plan as a guiding template, knowing exactly what will be step 1, step 2, step 3. In addition, we truly have a logic model that really gives us a roadmap of where we're going. Now, something I want to make sure people understand, having a business plan is fantastic to serve as a roadmap and a logic model, but I saw some of the questions regarding fundraising. You need to look to see what's your cost per child, cost per unit, cost to operate, in order to really start thinking exactly how much it will cost year 1, year 2, year 3, and even more as an organization, you need to keep in mind there'll be other internal costs. PASA had to deal with this. As we grew, we needed additional staff. As we grew, even our core business functions needed additional supports. So as you're scaling up and a business plan clearly articulates how you're going to scale up the programming, keep in mind your core business functions. If you scale up, you serve with youth, you're going to need a better data management system. If you're scaling up and you raise more funding, your fiscal management needs to improve. So those two things, operational, direct services, and core business functions, need to be part of the plan as you scale up.
And this is Keith Connors from the Department of Higher Education in Massachusetts. I would echo a couple of things that we saw on Alex's slide and what we found here when we were thinking about a statewide plan to scale effective programs. And that was first really having a clear plan. So our state STEM plan, called the Foundation for the Future Massachusetts Plan for Excellence in STEM Education, really clearly defined for us 5 measurable goals. And along with each goal were clear strategies for reaching those goals. So we could use that state STEM plan as a roadmap to develop the model that we developed for at-scale to begin to address the 1,000 points of light and bring it down to a portfolio. And the portfolio isn't a means to say that these 17 programs are the most effective. In fact, this evaluation that we're going through is to really better understand the model and better understand how we solicited for projects and understand the barriers that may have been presented. For instance, perhaps that 3-to-1 is too high of a bar for the amount of funding that organizations would receive. So it's about refining the model. I think it's something else I saw on one of Alex's slides. It's creating a model, and then it's really using the networks that we have here in Massachusetts. So we have a statewide system of regional STEM networks. There's 9 across the state, led by, in most cases, an institution of higher education. And they're a collaboration of higher education, K-12 schools, businesses in that region, the local governments in that region, to really look at the regional needs, because the Berkshires in Massachusetts is far different from the metro area of Boston, say, to understand what they need, both in their workforce and in their educational training systems. And then through these networks, really be the implementers of the state STEM plan and help make this at-scale initiative better known, connect with their local partners to get them on board, to make sure they're aware of the opportunity to be part of an endorsed project in the state, and then to help us provide data to feed it. I just say one last thing. Our first phase in at-scale was student interest. And I say this to help other states as you're kind of thinking about, well, where do we start and what data do we look at? So since 2008, I believe, we've been buying the student interest questionnaire from the College Board to particularly look at those questions that talk about course taking and interest in college majors. And we've been looking at that year to year to measure student interest in Massachusetts. And then when we targeted the first release of a competitive process to identify at-scale projects based on increasing student interest, we really identified those areas where students had great achievement, but they weren't all that interested in STEM, and how could we bring programs into those regions and those school districts that would excite our students around STEM education because they already had the strength in terms of their skills in STEM education. So that's just one little strategy I thought I'd share.
Thanks to both of you. I want to pick up on some of the things you said and also take us to the next set of questions we have. We have a couple of questions around fundraising. And so one question says, what's the best way to address fundraising when it comes to scaling up? Should you fundraise for the operating costs for at least 1 to 2 years before actually opening a site? And then another question is actually a broader question about funders in general. Who are the funders that look to support this type of scaling up work, particularly if you're a small city and you may feel like you're less visible to some of the larger national foundations that engage in this work? And so I'm wondering if the three of you can offer perspectives on how to fundraise and for what time period, as well as who might be the folks you look to.
I can respond, but did someone want to go first? Well, let me just tell you real quick, in Massachusetts, I was mentioning it when I was going through my slides that it is a challenge. We have pulled together just recently, so we've had nascent conversations with the executives of major STEM companies here in Massachusetts, brought in through the Governor's STEM Advisory Council. The governor issued the invitations. Both co-chairs were part of this. And we had a conversation of understanding what their particular needs were and what they would like to see the state be able to accomplish as a partner in our workforce development efforts here. And through that, in a way, there was an ask, and it was asking businesses, and what can you do to help this effort as well? And it doesn't have to be just monetary. It can be opening up their companies to tours, mentorships, internships, et cetera. So we started those initial conversations And the other thing I just would say, I think, is showing some traction here in Massachusetts, and that's that whole idea of endorsement, that we have gone through a rigorous process of filtering projects to identify those that have a long track record, strong data behind them, that have shown real results, so that we can say to businesses, well, geez, we have this portfolio of projects. You don't have to look at every, 100 emails that come your way for funding. Here's a portfolio of projects. And if you like these projects, the 17, we know of other types of projects that are like that these 17 might not be the best fit, but at least you'll understand the type of projects that they are, and kind of apply your funding in a way that suits you best.
Thanks, Keith. Alex or April, would you like to add anything about fundraising?
Thank you. I can definitely speak, especially being in Providence. You know, Providence is a tiny little city. We're not New York. We're not Boston. We're in between. So we have this Napoleon complex. You know, we're not that big. Corporations are not around, and industry left. So how do we fundraise in a place there's truly no philanthropy? There's no big corporations. So our approach has been this braided funding approach. How do we leverage resources from anybody and anywhere to support our goals? So for that reason, we've been able to leverage funding from a school district who truly believes in what we do, leverage funding from the city, leverage funding from 21st century learning centers. So our approach has been, if all of us come together, once again, and going back to having a clear goal and outcomes and roles and responsibilities, we're able to attract national funders. And it's been incredible for such a small city, less than 1 million people, to attract an amount of money. So it's having a clear plan and having clear results and having the data to prove it. So that has been our role as our organization, right? Like I said earlier, in order to scale up, we know we have community providers doing incredible work. Our job was to tell the story on a national level, and that's what we have done. By telling the story on a national level, having the data to prove it has allowed us to leverage funds. Now, when we leverage national funds, we go back to our local, philanthropic community, which is anemic to say the least, and said, hey, do you want to be part of something bigger? This is not about Providence. It's about making a model that has been replicated in over 30 cities throughout the United States. So we have been able to leverage national attention, leverage local attention by combining and saying, let's do something special. So once again, our job is to be this facilitator. Our job is to be a champion for those that may not have the ability to have a voice. So PASA's role has been that. And going back to the point, how do you fundraise for year 1, year 2? I would say if you have a clear plan, you should be doing that. You should be fundraising to ensure you have operating costs for 3 years down the line. Always think about a rainy day fund, especially in moments like this, because as you know, especially this business of education, fads come in and out and go. So you have to ensure your product is high quality, and you can sustain the fads, and you can remain doing the day-to-day businesses. So as you're growing, operate year 1, year 2, and always think about your internal costs. It's so interesting that indirect stays the same for a lot of organizations, even though the cost of doing business goes up every year. You have to keep that in mind.
That's a really great point. I think there's something that both of you said that can't be overemphasized, and that is how important it is to be clear in your planning and also clear in your targets about where you're headed, so that you can accurately make the case that there is a need, so that when you attract, your national and local funders, you're able to speak effectively. And I also wanted to mention, defining scale in the first place. What scale means for you, for your organization, for your community, can be a really challenging task. As we were talking amongst the, nonprofit providers in the learning community that participated in the development of this report, one of the providers, Communities in Schools, is in thousands of sites across the country, yet they're reaching about 10% of the students who they estimate would benefit from their model. And so, you can think about organizations that are very large, like Communities in Schools or like the YMCA, and it's still very hard to say, what is that ultimate target? How do we define scale? So I think that's an important conversation you should have with your organization so that you can plan toward that target. I also know that many organizations do take that what I'll call a slow bake approach, where, you have a process whereby you assess whether the organization or the community is ready for growth, and then you, like Alex said, actively fundraise for that in anticipation of it and support the development over time. I wanted to ask April one final question, because I know our time is ending here, but we got a question from the Boys and Girls Club saying they also focus on after school and summer learning. And are there any best practices you would share in collaborating for scale?
Oh, absolutely. That's a great question. And something I had sort of mentioned during my presentation of that critical importance of partnerships, both for us at the national level, but also at the local level. And so for best practices, what we've noticed is really having sort of a transparent agenda, coming together at that local level to really be able to share common goals, especially, again, we're all focused on this achievement gap issue. How do we come together and sort of maybe let go of some of our individual agendas and goals and really come together with a transparency to think about what are our common goals? Now, how would you come together, strong communication, and really begin to collaborate around those common shared goals?
Thank you, April. Does anyone else want to offer any best practices in collaboration before we close? Okay.
I would just add, and I know because I hear this a lot, it's a simple fact that as a staff, your hiring practices, you'll be surprised what a good facilitator and a good listener leading the charge can do to improve collaboration. You may have a plan, but if the person leading that plan can't work in a team, it's not going to go anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And this is Keith. I would just say from our perspective that data is so important. We have a data dashboard on our statewide STEM website. It has over 140 discrete indicators, and to really be able to show potential funders, not only the plan, but the data that supports the advancement that particular projects you hope to fund are making, really makes a difference in terms of the success in that ask.
Thank you so much. Well, I really appreciate all of the time that our thoughtful presenters put into their remarks, and it's clear that they are all involved in some exciting initiatives. Thank you to everyone who participated for your time and attention, and we look forward to continuing this conversation. Thanks so much, everyone.